Alright, today I'm going to show you how to adjust your rake as far as how it sweeps, kind of explain a few things and some of the things that you need to check on yours to make sure you're not overstressing your rake arm on one side or the other, maximize the life of the rake arm, and set everything as close to perfect as possible. So let's get started, and I'll show you two different rake sweep scenarios. One will be where the rake crank rod is adjusted to the proper length, and one, if you have it longer, it actually throws off the height as the rake sweeps. Now notice in that video, I had the rake crank rod at the proper adjustment, and you had a good height on the sweep back and sweep forward. There should always be just a little bit more height on the return than it is when it goes back. Notice in that video how when the rake swept that it was a little bit more, it dropped more and came back, and then dropped and came back again when it went forward. Having the longer rake crank rod like that too long causes it to do that. Also, if you notice when it came forward how it slammed forward, you could hear it hit the stops a lot harder, where in the prior video it gently came forward and it gently hit the stops. So there's a lot more stress on it when the rod's too long. Now, one thing to make sure you have an adjustment is right here on your stop gap. This one and over here on the other side, they should be as even as possible when the rake is all the way forward. What you can do is cycle the pin setter and catch the 4-to-1 at its most forward point when the rake is being released, and make sure that the rake itself is contacting both stops equally. You don't want one hitting more than another. You want to spread that between both sides. Otherwise, you're going to have more stress right in this area here if you have one side hitting here when the other side is not absorbing the same impact on this bracket equally on both sides. Cycle the pin setter until the 4-to-1 is full forward at this point, about right here where you have pretty much a straight line between the rake crank rod and the 4-to-1. Then come up here to your sweep hook and check between the hook and the little pin in here that you see here in the video. There should be a very minimal gap in there, probably 1/8 of an inch or so. You can usually loosen the jam nut on this rod here, turn the rod and move that until you feel a little bit of a drag on it, and then you can increase the length of the rod until you don't feel the drag on that, and then I would jam that nut in place right there and call that good, because you want as minimal gap in that as possible. So that way when the rake is cranking forward, think about this. At this point of the arch in the 4-to-1, the rake is going at its slowest point. Up here on the top, it's going at its fastest. The 4-to-1's at a constant speed, but at this point, the rake is going maximum speed. When it comes down here, the rake is actually slowing down at the front of the arc. So when it gets to this point here, which is right where it should release, is at its slowest point, and you don't want that rake slamming forward into those stops, because that's what causes your rake arm to overstress and crack right here, and then you're going to have, in the middle of league, of course, as it never happens when it's convenient, you're going to have to do some kind of a quick repair or something to get it through league. They sell kits for that, unless you have a welder present. You can throw a weld on there real quick, depending on how good you are. I know I probably couldn't, but anyways, at full forward though, you want a very minimal gap in between this hook and this block right here. It's right there, it just barely clears, and I'm at my forwardmost point with the 4-to-1 right now. As you loosen this jam nut right here and adjust that to where your gap is just barely there. You don't want it to rub. You can loosen that jam nut and rotate that rod, and when you start feeling it dragging a little bit on there, bring it back till it's clear and then tighten it down. Now this is the cam that rides on the 1-to-1, and this is what causes the rake to raise and lower during the cycle. It's a coordinated effort between the 4-to-1 pulling it back and forward and this roller right here riding on this cam. Here's your 180 spot right here. And if this cam is timed out right, your rake should sweep back just a little lower than it does when it comes forward. You almost want to see it come back and then raise up just a little bit on the forward sweep. So right here is your 180 spot. And you can loosen the bolts on this cam right here and rotate this a little bit in case your rake is sweeping lower on the forward motion than it is on the back motion. You need to time out your 1-to-1 just a little bit better. Now if you notice here, this is 180. You can see how the cam is just offset where it's just past that low spot on the lobe. That's kind of what you want. What you can do is set the machine at 180 and then maybe crank it back a few degrees, and that's about where you would want to set that center spot on the cam right there. So what I did is I cranked it back just a little bit before 180. That's about where I'm at right there. And that cam is right on the center of that lobe. So that's kind of what you want to do. You can rotate the cam, you loosen the bolts on this cam right here, and the whole thing will slip. You want to make sure you get them tight because you don't want that cam slipping. And it could be just out of time if your rake's not sweeping right. But right there, dead center, just before 180. And that'll make your rake sweep back at one height and come forward just a little bit higher. You don't want to see it sweeping back higher and coming forward lower. I've stopped the pin setter just before the rake hits the stops coming back forward. You'll notice there's that gap over there, and you'll notice this gap over here are almost identical. Okay, I've stopped the machine here where it's making contact. You can push on the rake arm and it comes up in contact right there as that arm hits that stop. Now what I've noticed is mine is actually a little bit off on the other side, so I need to correct that. There's just a little bit of a gap over on the other side, so I need to even that out to where they're both together. Do not ever loosen that bracket with that rake stop over there and this one at the same time, because these are the only two things holding your spring tube from becoming a bazooka and killing somebody. That rake could come flying forward, so you need to make sure you leave either that bracket or this bracket tight at all times and make sure it's got a good grab onto that stop arm right there, that it's not too far back, because if it gets away from that right there and you got the other one loose, bad things can and will happen. Okay, I'm going to take out the gap over there. I'm going to loosen this one over here. It's a 3/4 inch. Luckily, with the lock nut and everything in there, I can turn it and it's not turning the bolt on the bottom. Loosen up my 3/4 right here, 3/4 over there, and that bracket's going to be loose. And you'll notice, there we go, get the wrench out of there, that now I can bring this bracket forward and close the gap in on that side. See, now I've got it loose and it's completely contacting over there. And this side is completely contacting over here. So right now they're together. So I'm going to tighten this side down and continue on. Okay, now I've retightened the bolts on both stopping blocks and they should be even now. Let me show you. This side comes in contact right there. The same as if you check the other side, they both contact at the same exact time. Now I'm checking my hook here and it looks like I got a little bit of drag on there, so I'm going to need to lengthen this just a little bit. to get a little bit of a gap in their clearance so it doesn't catch and sweep back into the machine. Now check my latch after lengthening the crank rod just a little bit, and it's not touching anymore right here at the most forward point of the sweep cycle, which is right here. You can look on your detector if you've never noticed that. Let me get a little bit more light on here. You got a little indicator on the side of the detector to tell you what the machine is at. Right now we're between 180 and 270. See that little tick mark right at the bottom of the circle in the middle of the shaft? So right now the machine's halfway between 180 and 270. You can always look at that as a reference if you want to know where your machine is. If you follow all the adjustments I just showed you, you should maximize the life of your rake arm by minimizing the stress on one arm over the other, making sure that they both contact your stops equally, and have the least amount of gap between your hook and rake catch as possible, because if you have too big of a gap, you're going to be slamming the rake forward, which is going to put a lot of stress on your arms, and it could cause them to break sooner than later. It also throws off your sweep adjustment height. So you want to have the minimum amount between the hook, and you want to have the cam set just before 180, so you have it sweeps back a little lower than it sweeps forward. So if you have any other questions or any other comments, check me out on my other videos. Leave me a comment, send me some requests. I'll try to do some more or explain anything else. Thanks for watching. See you live in the garage this weekend.